All right, so here we go. We're all sitting in the IEP room. I'm the diagnostician. You guys are the teachers and the family, okay? So what I say is, for our evaluation, I administered a group of standardized tests. And before we talk about your child's scores, I want to make sure that you understand how to understand the scores that you're going to hear, where those scores, what they come from, okay? So I put up this bell curve, okay? And here's what I say. So on a standardized test, okay, the way a test is standardized is the test manufacturer goes and gets a large sample of students and they test them. And then I show them, I say, this bell curve represents, okay, the bell curve represents the sample. Okay, that's what it is. And the reason the sample goes up, the bell curve goes up in the middle, is because that's where most people are. Most people are average in that middle range, okay? Not that many people are really low, and that's why the curve goes down on this end, and not that many people are really high, and so it goes down there. I think right there, that kind of demystifies the bell curve, right? What this is, it's representing that large sample of thousands of kids that were tested. Okay, now what I say, and there's a little bit of sort of artistic license in this, but I think it's a way that helps the families understand. I say, see these red lines on here? We chopped up that group, the big sample group, we chopped it up into these different categories with these lines, okay? And there's different ways that we can describe those groups. And I know that's not a perfect, it's not perfect, but I think it's language that the family can understand. So I chopped that big group up, okay, the big national sample into these different sections, and now we're going to describe that, okay? And the first way we describe it is with standard scores, okay? And standard scores, what I say is that each test is made up of a lot of individual subtests, and when we bring those subtests together and get composite scores, they're reported as standard scores. And I know that's not a perfect alignment with everything, but it's a way, again, I'm trying to make the families and the teachers understand. And so what I say, on a standard score, if you make 100, it puts you right in the middle of that group. So compared to other students your age, and I always try to drop that in so that they understand, they're not being compared to 20-year-olds and 5-year-olds. It's an age-based comparison, okay? All right, so compared to other students your age, I think it's real important. It helps them. Now they're getting a clearer and clearer picture as what these scores mean. Compared to other students your age, if you make 100, it puts you exactly in the middle of this group. Okay, you're smack average right in the middle of the group. And what I like to say is, we're accustomed to 100 being a perfect score. On a standardized test, 100 just puts you right in the middle of the group. Okay, and then I point out there's this range in here. I go, see this the big window in the middle from 90 to 110? Half the kids in that national sample fall in that range. And so that's why they call this the average range. 50% of the kids are in this group here. And so I say, that's what we're aiming for. That's what, we want, that's what we're looking for is average performance, okay? So right there, so I say 90 to 110, half the kids are in that range. 25% score below 90, 25% score above 110. So I'm breaking it down so they're understanding these scores, okay? I have a paper copy of the bell curve so when this slide goes away, we've got one on the table there, so if they need to look back, okay? Then, so I say, all right, so those are the overall scores, the composite scores. The individual subtests that make up the larger test are reported with scaled scores, okay? On a scaled score, a 10 puts you right in the middle of the group instead of 100, okay? And that 50% group in the middle, it goes from 8 to 12. That's that average range, okay? So I'm focusing on them on the average range there, okay? And then I say down here, percentile ranks we're more accustomed to. A first percentile score is a low score, 99 is a high score. And so, because they're going to see standard scores, they're going to see scaled scores, and they're going to see percentile rank. And I want to make sure that they understand what that is. So that's how I start, okay? So then the next slide, all right?
You said this, sorry if you mentioned this, but you said this would happen in a eligibility determination?
Well, yeah, that's right, yeah. Whenever I'm explaining my evaluation, wherever I have, sometimes I do it with the family, separate, but anytime I'm explaining those standardized results to the family, if I haven't already shown them that bell curve and explained that, then I do. Because I think otherwise those standard scores, they have a real hard time understanding, what they mean. Okay. This should look familiar, okay? Here's Nancy Mathers. I really like to put this up, and here's what I say with this. I say, okay, this is a model of these are these factors that contribute to learning, okay? So here's what I say. I go, these boxes in the middle, this is the stuff that my testing measures, okay? And so I say, we're going to talk about this stuff, all right, with the scores. But this bottom line is really not stuff that I measure, nor at the top. But then I go to explain. So I say, these things are not things that I have scores on, all right? But they're very important, and they're real critical factors in learning, and they affect learning, okay? So we talk about it a little, just briefly, about attention, emotions. I talk about it, some kids have emotional interference, as I call it, okay? Behavior, okay? Self-esteem. Almost always, as we go across here, the people in the room are going, oh yeah, yeah. When they look up there, they in their mind, they're checking the boxes that apply to the student that we're talking about. When they see this model, and that's why Nancy, it's such a great model, I think, from Nancy Mather, It really works, because most kids are some combination of strengths and weaknesses across that. So what I say is, we're going to have a lot of scores, but there's a lot of other stuff that we don't have scores, but we need to keep that in mind as we're thinking about the scores, okay? So then I talk about, all right, so these are these processes that support our thinking and reasoning. I talk about auditory stuff, about, phonological processing, the visual stuff, working memory, okay? Then I come up here and I say, this is the reasoning part. This is your ability to think and reason and solve problems, okay? You can use language for thinking and reasoning and solving problems, okay? Or you can be more visual information and spatial information. So this is the stuff that our scores are going to be about, okay? Then the last box up here, the executive control, okay? And I talk about the executive skills. Planning, organizing, monitoring, goal-directed persistence, all that stuff. I briefly talk about that, and I say, I don't have any scores for that, but that's really important, and for some students, they have strengths and weaknesses here that affect their learning. So we've talked about the bell curve a little bit, so they understand what those scores mean. We've talked about what it is what are the pieces that you need to have in place to be successful learning, okay? I think this is really helpful. Here's the only problem that I've run into on this, that the other people in the IEP are just going, okay, I got 30 minutes and okay, right? I'm sorry, this is somebody's life, right? And I want to give them more than the 14 seconds. And so you're going to have to get used to that. And what happens to me the first time I do it, they're boiling mad when I get to a school. How dare you take more than 30 minutes? How dare you? But then after a while, they see it really helping, and then they're on board. It always happens. I go through this cycle, the hatred to I love you, okay? It happens every time, okay? The last school, the coolest school I'm currently at, boy, there was, they call it district office. He took up all our time, Well, then that person that got me in trouble at district office, guess what? Their granddaughter needed help. And so who did they call? Okay? And so I did a great evaluation, and I did a great interpretation with the family, okay? We recorded it. After that, they were like, oh my God, this really does help these families.
Did you go back to the district and tell them?
No.
Did you set a timer and at 30 minutes say sorry?
Yeah. And so I think that, just write it out for a while, okay? Because it really matters to the families. Not every family. Some of the families don't want to hear it. Some of the families aren't capable of hearing it. But there's quite a few that are, and that really, they walk out. They really have this great sense of relief, like somebody's finally explained what's going on, okay? And so that's this slide helps a lot. You guys have all these slides, right, on the PowerPoint. This is the PowerPoint for tonight, okay? And then it's on the other one. This should look familiar also, okay? This is that Hollis-Scarborough model, okay? So I talk about, since most of the kids are around reading, if it's not a reading one, I don't do this, this stuff, I talk about the different sides. This is down here where traditionally the largest weaknesses are, okay? And I talk about, we'll see this stuff in the test scores. Up here, this is more the language stuff, and so you guys know all this, right? I don't want to take up tonight explaining this because we've talked about this before. This is the language end, right? That more the language comprehension, right, in that simple view, and then this is the decoding stuff down here. right here though, but and we talk about how, this stuff up here, as you age and go through the school, you get more and more strategic with your comprehension. You're using comprehension strategies, but what we want down here is we want our word reading stuff to get more and more automatic. And so this helps to support now when I come into the scores, they got a framework around which to understand that, okay? All right, so here's the scores, okay? So I go straight to this. I say, here's the test that Jane took, okay? And I'll say the first one, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. And when I say, and again, I take some license. I say, this is reasoning and problem solving and memory. That's basically how I describe it, just as a drive-by explanation, okay? Then this one, the phonology, okay, the comprehensive test of phonology, that's where I say, this is about how they process sounds. And I always say, and I probably said it to you guys so many times, if you think about a telephone or a phonograph or a symphony, it's about the sounds, right? That root word in there, okay? So this phonological stuff, and we have a test for that. Silent word reading, what I say is because it's silent, and I do like this, it's more about the visual aspect of reading, okay? It's not about so much the auditory, it's more, this is that one from Nancy Mather, okay, where I emailed her and I said, isn't this a test of orthographic processing? And she said, well, yeah, it is, and it sure is. And I said, well, why don't they ever say the word orthographic processing anywhere in the manual or in there? And she didn't have an answer, and I think there's some politics behind that. So I say, so we're talking about this auditory part of reading and the visual part of reading, okay? And then the last one where I say this is a combined academic achievement test. So it's reading, writing, spelling, and math. And then what I say is we're going to go through them in this order. We'll talk about them in this order, okay? So I'm trying to lay down the trail for them so that they're really understanding the scores. So here's the first one, the intelligence test. And so what I say, we have this program that I really love, and as far as I know, I'm the only diagnostician in our district that actually uses this function in our program. It automatically makes these PowerPoints for you. I enter the scores into the software, and then when I download my report, a pop-up comes up and it says, would you like the PowerPoint? And I say, absolutely, I'd love to have the PowerPoint. And everyone else, as far as I know, just goes, no, 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 and I don't know why, because they're really great in the IEP for everybody. Everybody sitting there can see it. You're not having to flip through pages of reports or anything, okay? So here's the intelligence test. I say, these are the 10 subtests that make up the test, and we take combinations of those to make these composites down below. Okay, so now I'm trying to give them an understanding. So I said, I'm going to start with this first composite here, the verbal comprehension. And so what I just say on this, and again, there's some license in here, I say this is the verbal reasoning, okay? And depending on the meeting, I'll say it's verbal reasoning and acquired verbal knowledge, okay? Because if you think about like vocabulary, it's really not so much reasoning based. I don't think it's that important at that meeting for them to split that difference, okay? It's verbal, okay? That's the important part. So I'll say, okay, Jane got 104, okay? This is her actual score. And then I go like this, and I have my little cursor, and I go, if you look over here, that means she scored better than 61% of kids her age. Okay, so right there, I think that helps them to understand that. So then I say, so she did better than 61% of her kids her age on this verbal reasoning part, where that score came from, and then I go up here, okay? And I go through and I go similarities, okay? This is the first verbal subtest, okay? And this one, and I tell them how it works. I say 2 words to Jane, how are a pen and a pencil alike, and then she has to tell me verbally, she gives me an answer and I write it down. Okay, so I give them an example, and I try not to give the test away, and on the, I don't even know if it's in the new one, on the Contemporary Intellectual Assessment 2nd edition, which was the previous one from the one we're using, they have good sample questions in there that you can use that are not the actual ones, and so, but I'm not that worried about that. Okay, so I explained, so she got a 12 on this, and I say, remember back on our bell curve, this is that other kind of score. The 8 to 12 is the average range, and so I'm refreshing their memory on that what does that mean? So I say, this is way up at the very top of average range, and she did better than 75% of kids her age on this, okay? And I go to the next one and say, the next verbal one is vocabulary, and what I say on this is just a verbal vocabulary test, and everybody seems to understand that. I say a word, they tell me what that word is or what it means. So Jane got a 10, which puts her right at the 50th percentile, right in the middle compared to other kids her age. Okay, the last one, the verbal one, is the comprehension. And so here's how I describe comprehension. I say this is my language that I use. I say it's situational questions about social and cultural information. All right? And so it's a situation and it's about social and cultural information. And then I give them an example. Why is it important for the police to wear uniforms? Okay? That kind of question, I hope that, and it appears to work, it makes them understand, oh, that's that kind of question, okay? So I've explained what's going on, then I say Jane got an 11, which puts her, she did better than 63% of kids her age. And then I say if you take those three scores, similarities, vocabulary, and comprehension, and put them together, they form this overall comprehension score here, right? Where she did better than 61%. All right, then I go on to the next one. So the next one, this is what I say, this is nonverbal reasoning, okay? And I realize perceptual reasoning, that's the big problem with the WISC-4, right? But, I'm not trying to, it's not a college class, I'm trying to get the families to understand. So I'll say, okay, so on this one, Jane got a 90, and I'll point out if there's a big difference here, right? I can sit and I go, which is 25th percentile, and then I'll say, you can see, there's a difference here, verbally, reasoning with language, she did better than 61% of kids, but on this part, she was at 25th percentile, which is average, but way down at the bottom of average, okay? So where did this score come from? Up here, block design, this is where, and I just explained to them, this is visual spatial reasoning. I set up the blocks in a certain pattern, she's got to take her blocks and match that pattern within a time limit, okay? I'm not getting into any sort of, theoretical explanation. All right, but I think they can understand that. So I say she got a score of 9, which is better than 37% of kids her age. Okay, I'll remind them again. You remember average performance is 8 to 12. All right, the next one, picture concepts. Okay, picture concepts, the way I describe it, I say it's categorical reasoning. All right, so that might not mean anything, but then I take the explanation a little further and I say she looks at 2 or 3 rows of pictures and she has to pick one thing from each row that would go together into some category that she's figured out, okay? And that's categorical reasoning, and I realize that's not a perfect explanation of all that, right? But I think it's something that the family can understand. So on this one, she got a 10, which puts her exactly average 50th percentile, okay? When the students fall down on this one, often, that thing where they can't resist the distractors, okay? The 2 trees, right? When then there's nothing in the 3rd row, right? Or they have all those distractors built in. If the student has a low score here, on my protocol when I'm testing them, if the distractors seem to be a big issue with those kids, then I'll put a note. Or if it's impulsivity, or I try to note where that score came from, and then I'll explain it in here. If it's an average score, then I don't elaborate on that. But typically, was it impulsivity? Was it the distractors? What was it that, or did the kids sit there and really try, but they just couldn't figure it out, okay? And I think that's helpful for them to understand. And usually as I offer up those insights like that, then a small discussion ensues with the teacher says, oh yeah, that happened in the class, or the mom says, oh, at home it's like that, or not, and right? And so it enriches the conversation when they come in and add to that, okay? So there's picture concepts, which is the categorical reasoning. And then I go, the last one of these nonverbal reasoning is matrix reasoning. And so I'll say she got a 6 here, which is down at the 9th percentile. And then I'll point out, you can see there's a big difference here from 50th percentile and 37th percentile. Then, so here, that's where I like to talk about this. So what's going on here? And so here's how I describe matrix reasoning. Matrix reasoning is designed to measure how well Jane can solve problems with new information, not with stuff that she's been taught or practiced. Okay, that's how I say it. So that they have it, so it's novel to them. All right. I describe it. I say it's like a tic-tac-toe board, and I do that, and I say that's why it's called a matrix. Okay. And then I think that helps them to understand what is matrix. Well, if you think of a tic-tac-toe board, that's a matrix. And I say 3 of the squares are filled in and 1 of them is empty, and Jane has to pick which one of these from the bottom can I put into the empty square to complete that, which will agree with that pattern or complete that pattern. And I usually say matrix reasoning, because it's nonverbal and because we want to make sure it's novel and it's not something your students ever said before, it's mostly geometric shapes and patterns. That's what I know, that's not exactly right, but it helps them to understand that what it is, that in those squares are these geometric shapes and patterns. They got to find the one that goes in the empty square that'll agree with that or complete that pattern. Okay, so they're getting a rudimentary understanding of what this test is measuring. Okay, all right. So then, and I'll talk about that. All right. So down here, right, and we'll talk a little bit about how we've got some average and some below average and that stuff. Okay, all right. So then I go on, right. Then I say at this point, when I'm done with that, I say, that's it for the reasoning parts of the test. Now we're going to move into these other processes that are important for learning, but they're not reasoning based. They're not about thinking and solving problems. I think that's really important for the families to understand that there's really two halves to this test. There's the thinking and reasoning part, and can I solve problems? And then there's these other processes that support my thinking and reasoning. Okay? And so I say, these ones down here, these are not thinking and reasoning. Okay? These are these other processes. So I go to working memory. And this is a real kid's scores, right? And this is real typical, right? All right, so you can see what I'll say is here we had 2 scores that are in the average range for the reasoning part. And I'll explain, that's typical, for students with a learning disability, is that their ability to think and reason and solve problems is average. That's not what's affecting their learning, okay? And this score, so I say, but now look at the working memory score. She's down at the 6th percentile. She only did better than 6% of students her age. Okay, so now where did this come from? So I go up here to digit span and I explain digit span. I say, now digit span has 2 parts. There's digits forward. I say some numbers and I say 47321. I always say the same number. Okay, it's burned in my head. 47321. And Jane just has to say what I say. Okay, and I say that's the digit forward, and I say that's short-term memory. All she's got to do is just hold on to it and say it back to me. Okay, all right. Then there's digits backwards, and I say some different numbers, okay, and then Jane has to, for this part, she has to remember what I said, but she has to reorder it and say it in backwards order. And I'll give them an example. And what I always do to try and make it easy is on myself, if nothing else, I say, if I say 1, 2, 3, she has to say 3, 2, 1, so that if they didn't understand that forwards backward part, then they have an example. But then I say it's not sequential and easy like that, okay? This program, my only complaint about this PowerPoint, it won't allow me to put in the forwards and backwards. Okay, and so then I'll have that paper there, and I'll share with them what the score was. It's in the report. Okay, all right. So there's her score, and I'll talk about. So she got a scaled score of 5, and I'll say again, remember 8 to 12 is that average range, so she's below average, and she only did better than 5%. And then what I like to say is this to them. I like to say, can I remember some numbers, and can I say some numbers forwards and backwards? And I'll say, you see how that's not reasoning and you're not solving a problem? And that's a real good, I think, a good example, so they understand, oh, that's what he means by this is not reasoning based, okay? I am using my mind, but I'm not thinking and reasoning and solving problems, okay? Then I'll go down to letter number sequencing, and this is a typical profile, I think, is that generally letter number sequencing the students do a little bit better. It's not uncommon for me to see an 8 down here, even if they had a lower score here, like hitting the beginning of average range. So letter number sequencing, I go like this. I say for letter number sequencing, I say some numbers and I say some letters, but when I say them, they're mixed up. And so they get a little visual so that they're understanding what your kid is hearing. And then I say HCN32, right? And I realize it starts out with one number and one right and all that, but they don't need to, right? What they need to understand is this concept. I'm going to say a mixed up string of letters and numbers, and then what Jane has to do, she has to remember that mixed up string, and then she has to disaggregate them, tell me the numbers first in counting order, and I do like that, then tell me the letters in ABC order. And they got a little visual to anchor their understanding on around that, okay? Then I go on to explain, okay, so she got a 7 here, which is 16th percentile, still below average. I'll talk a little bit about the difference here, how typically students score a little bit better, and then I talk about, a la the final, what does account for differences in working memory? Control of attention, right? Control of attention. And I talk about that. It's not so much about a memory. I like to give them, again, there's some artistic license. I say, you can think about your working memory as it has about 7 slots in there that hold information, okay? And if 4 of your slots are filled up with recess and ice cream and the movie you saw last night, you're going to have a lower score. Or if you're unable to block out distracting thoughts and stuff is knocking stuff out that you were supposed to remember. Right there, I think it helps them to understand that, and I say that's about your attentional control. Can you block out that distracting stuff so it's not taking up some of your 7 slots in your working memory? I realize it might be 4, it might be 7, it's all right, but that I don't think that matters in the IEP setting, okay? All right, then we go on to processing speed, okay? So again, I say this is not the reasoning-based stuff, okay? So then I like to show them the little student response booklet on that, because it's so hard to explain the little symbols and the, right? And so I'll say, see on this side, you know, for coding, it's easy. You know, they have to match the numbers and the symbols. That's real easy. I talk about, you know, they need, how many can they get done in 2 minutes, okay? Because to try to explain that without them actually seeing it, and again, that second edition, they have good examples in there that you can Xerox, okay? And then I talk about, you know, can I match some symbols and some numbers and symbols? I go, see how that's not reasoning? You're not having to solve a problem. I want to key them in again, that we're not talking about thinking and reasoning on this part of the test, that there are these different processes. But what I say then is, this is about is how quickly and how accurately can I process letters and numbers or letter and number-like symbols. And then I say, think about reading and writing in math. There's pages full of little letters and numbers and symbols that you have to quickly and accurately process. And so even though this is not the same, it's measuring things that are like that. All right, and I think that helps them to, what's this have to do with learning? Okay, because for reading and writing and math, you've got to quickly and accurately process the little symbols on the page. Okay, symbol search, right? So and I talked about symbol search, right? And I show them the symbol search and how that works. Okay. Then I say, if you take all 10 of these and put them together, you get this overall score down here of 88, which is better than 21% of students her age. What I'm with Ricky and probably, you know, the majority of you know, people anymore, I don't like full scale score, and I'll explain to them. I'll say, you know, what I do is this. I go, let's look across Jane's profile up here. She has scores that go from the 5th percentile to the 75th percentile with every score in between. And so I say, this really dilutes the meaning, is how I put it. I say it's almost like we poured all those scores into a bucket and just saw how high the water rose. It really is not very informative. I said, really what Jane has is strengths and weaknesses. Some of her strengths are better than this, and some of her weaknesses are lower than this. And so I say, I think it's better if we focus on these composite scores here, okay? All right, there's the intelligence testing. Then I'll ask them, you know, do you have any questions about this, right? And I think if you do a good job explaining like that, generally you won't have a lot of questions. And I don't think it's just, you know, it's not just blinding them with science. I think they understand, okay? All right, so here's the C-top. So I'll talk about, this is the phonological test. I'll go, remember about the telephone or the phonograph, okay? Anytime you see this phono part, it's about how they process the sounds of language, okay? So I'll say again, these subtests up here are the you put together to get the composite scores down below. The first one, the phonological awareness, okay? This one, Jane got a score of 80, okay, which is at the 9th percentile. I'd like to point out again to them that, again, this is not reasoning based, because all, in my opinion, the unspoken sentence that is behind every step of this process is, my kid's not smart, and that's why they're struggling. My kid's not smart. My kid's not smart. The student's thinking that. The parents are afraid of that. And so you have to explicitly say the opposite, right? This is not reasoning, okay? So I'll talk about it. So this is, and I say, remember the reasoning part of the test, how well she could think and reason, how that was all average? Well, now look, now we're way down here at the 9th percentile. And so then I explain this elision. I say, it's all auditory. I say there's no written part to it, so it's all about how you can do with the sounds. And I explain, I'll say, you know, say cowboy, take away boy, what's left? And I give them some examples. I do cowboy and I do snail, are my examples. Say snail, take away, what's left, sail, right? And I do my hands like this to give them a little visual, okay? And then I say, now see how, can I hear some sounds in a word? See how that's not a reasoning task? Because I really want them to understand. It's not just me being nice. It's not reasoning, and they need to understand that. This is the core weakness that my child has, but it's not about how smart they are. Okay, they really need a real clear understanding of that, in my opinion. It's very helpful. What we're trying to do is prevent that bomb from going off with that kid that I hate myself, I hate school, and now it affects everything about my life instead of just when I'm reading and writing, okay? And so they need to hear an explicit somebody saying that, okay? All right, so I explain what that elision, how it's segmenting, and then I talk about the blending words, and I say, for blending, I say, I give them the word part, and I do like this, it's already chopped up. And what Jane has to do is remember what I said, and then take those parts and push them back together and make them into a word. Okay, so that they're understanding. And I say it's all auditory, there's no written part to it. And I explained, for most students struggling in reading, this is their core weakness. This is why they're struggling. In spite of having average intelligence, okay, in spite of those average reasoning scores, this part here, how I process the sounds of language, is what has interfered with my reading, okay? That, they need to hear that, I believe. All right, then I talk about rapid naming, okay? So I'll go down here, okay? Here's the rapid naming, 88, and I'll talk about how 90's average, so they're getting close on that. And then, we'll talk about percentile rank. I think I like percentile ranks. I think that's what's easiest to understand instead of the standard scores, okay? And then I'll go up here and talk about this. And for this student, what I would say is, well, you can see she was average on digits, but her letter naming, and this is, how quickly and accurately she can name the letters, that often relates to a reading weakness, okay? That, the kids that are behind in reading, this was a third grader, okay? Kids that are behind in reading, a lot of the time have trouble with their letter names, okay? All right, so there's the C-top, okay? Then we go on, now this is the silent word reading, and then I remind them, because this is silent, this is more about the visual aspect of reading. I don't say orthographic processing or any of that, right? I just say this is more about the visual aspect of reading. And what I like to do, I don't know if you guys have seen this one, it's like the word search where all the words have been smashed together in a line. There's no spaces, and what the student has to do is they have to take their pencil and draw a line in between each of the words, okay? And so I whip that out so they can see it, right? See what it's really easy to understand when they see that. And so I talk about that. What this test really is to me, it's a measure of how are you doing on converting words to automatic sight words, right? That's really what this is. Because the orthographic processing is how words become. A sight word is a visually activated, right? That's why it's called a sight word, right? Okay? And so that's really what this test is a measure to me. It's not a test, a measure of orthographic processing. What it is measure how well am I doing on converting over, am I about to hit critical mass on my sight words or not? Well, Jane's not, right? She's having a lot of trouble with that, converting these words over to words that she can automatically recognize on sight, right? And I want them to understand that. That's the name of the game here. To be a good reader, you have to have a large bank of words that you can automatically recognize on sight, okay, without effortful decoding. I always throw that in because that's the important part, okay? And so we'll talk, they see that, and I talk about that. So I say, I like to try to connect the dots for the parents here too. I'll say, because of that phonological weakness and the working memory and attentional control weakness, she's having trouble here making sight words, taking words from words that I have to decode to words that I automatically recognize. Okay, so there's my explanation for that. Then here's the Wyatt. So this is our battery for this class, right? So up here, this student did not have any, when she came to me, there was no language testing. Remember what I was saying, that if they've already been screened with the speech therapist, then I don't go ahead and do the language parts on the, if I have a current language score that I can use, then I don't do that. But for this student, she didn't. And so I explain, I go down this long list here, okay? So I say, all right, and I'm not going to do the whole explanation. Listening comprehension, this is your ability to understand what you're hearing, okay? So she got 100, she came out exactly average for her age, no problem there. Her receptive vocabulary, this is her ability to understand vocabulary words, okay? 105, and I'll say, perfectly average, something like that, 63rd percentile. Oral discourse comprehension, and I'll say this is her ability to understand connected language, sentences, and stories. Again, 95, right in the middle of the average range. And so what I'll say at that point is, it doesn't seem like that she's got a weakness here, right, in her ability to understand language, all right? Early reading skills. So here, and what I'd like to point out to the family is that remember her reasoning skills, because I want them to keep that idea in mind that my kid is fine on her ability to reason, but it's these other things. Remember her reasoning skills were average, but but let's look at this. Her early reading skills, she was only at the 4th percentile. Okay? And I say, what this measures is segmenting, blending, letter names, letter sounds, rhyming, and basic decoding. Right? Those are these early skills that you need for reading, and she's got a weakness there, and that's about the other things that we talked about, the phonological processing and the attentional control. Okay? So right there, and I like to say, this is, so now we're starting to see the weakness, right? And then what I like to do, instead of just marching down the list, at this point, I like to lump the reading skills together. So I'll say, so let's look at some other reading, and so I'll go down to reading comprehension. So she got a 97, right? So she came out real average on that, right? 42nd percentile. And I'll say that's a strength. And what I say is, in spite of having weaknesses in her basic reading, because she's a smart kid, I want to emphasize that to them. Remember her reasoning scores, how good her reasoning scores were? Because she's a smart kid, in spite of having these weaknesses in her basic reading skills, she's able to pull it off here, right, and do okay. But then I say, but let's look at word reading. So we go down to word reading, okay? And I say, she's just reading a list of words. There's no comprehension in there now, okay? It's just, can I decode words, right? And so I go across here and I go, see, she's only 12th percentile on that, okay? And then I say, so also let's look at pseudo words, and this is where she has to decode nonsense words. I say, and I explain, the reason we do this is because some kids are word memorizers. Even though they're terrible decoders, they memorize whole words. But if it's a pseudo word, if it's a nonsense word, they couldn't have memorized it. Okay, they've never seen it before. And so I point out, look, see, she's only 8th percentile in this. So it seems that she's got a weakness in her basic reading skill and her ability to decode words. And that weakness comes from that phonological and attentional control weakness. And I try to chain it together, okay? All right, so and then I go, there's one more reading, so her reading fluency, and I say, this is her speed and accuracy of reading out loud, okay? So overall, her fluency score was 5th percentile. And I say, I believe that the reason that she's only 5th percentile in fluency is because of these word level weaknesses. It's not up here at the language and the comprehension. Okay, so that we're separating these things into these different piles, all right? And then I like to, so her overall fluency was 5th percentile, her accuracy, so this is what I say is this is the amount of words that she could read accurately. And I don't, and again, there's some, it's not a percentile, right? Like that. I say she did better than 12% of kids her age. And then her reading rate, so I say this is the speed of reading, is only 6th percentile. Okay? And what I like to explain here is the reason I believe she's having a real low rate of reading is because the word level stuff, because she has so much trouble decoding the words, so that the family understands that's where how this all goes together. And then I like to keep going and throw spelling in. And what I say is reading words is decoding and spelling words is encoding. And you're using the same code, but just in a different direction. Decoding or encoding, and the code is the alphabet, all right? The alphabet is a code for our spoken language. Somebody needs to explain that to them, right? When clear language, all right? You guys need to do that. And so I say, and this kid's unusual. Most commonly, I don't see a kid that falls down on decoding, but is okay on, right? This is and that's you're gonna get plenty of that. There's every kind of kid out there. So I'll talk about, well, she got an average score in here, and that's a strength, and that's good, and maybe she's got some, maybe her visual memory is better than we think. Okay.
Coming back to Marilyn Adams, it's almost like in our minds thinking of that triangle.
Mm-hmm.
She's pretty good with orthographic processing,
right.
I would think, because of that spelling score. Her meaning processor is good because
right.
of the reasoning. Where she's fallen down is that phonological processor.
God bless you. I love that model, and so where should intervention go? It shouldn't be, don't guess. Let's use context clues, Jane. Just guess what word would make sense in that spot. That is not gonna, the name of the game is she's gotta get words, she's gotta convert words into automatically recognized sight words. And the way you do that is through interletter activation energy and through visual processing. Without that, you're nowhere. And so when I'm guessing meanings and guessing words to go in blanks, I'm not even looking at the letters. How could that possibly be building my interletter activation energy, right? I don't talk with them, but, right, they've got that's the road to automatic sight words, okay, it's through that. And what's interfering with that is the phonological stuff, okay? All right, so then I say, okay, so there's our reading. So then I'll talk about the math. So math problem solving, I say, this is applied math problems, and I say calendars, charts, time, money, graphs. I'll say stuff like that so that they understand what applied math problems are. And so I'll say, you know, she got an average score, and what I say with a score like this is, it's not a strong score, but it's at the beginning of the average range, okay, so that they have a sense that it's kind of right there on the boundary, okay? So I say, let's look then at the other math score, which is numerical operations. So I'll go down here. And so I say numerical operations is just pencil and paper math problems is how I describe it to them. So that they get an idea of the difference, you know, charts and graphs and money and time versus just pencil and paper math problems. So she got 101. So I say that looks good. And then down here, on this one, and I don't think it'll show me, they're on there, the fluency scores. So, and I say this is actually very common for students that have dyslexia, if I've talked about that already or not, or that have phonological processing weaknesses. It's very common for them to have trouble memorizing their math facts. And I talk about how this is just 1 minute, how many of these math facts. And I believe on the rest of those she was low also. And so I'll talk, you know, there's this, you know, relationship between poor phonological processing and how we store our math facts in a phonological form. We store them in a language-based form, okay? And how even that phonological processing can affect your math facts automaticity, okay? Then there's writing, and so I'll go up here, sentence writing, and this is the onerous writing one. So I'll talk about, here's her composite sentence writing in 92, here's the two scores, combining and building, and these two are the same. So usually the kids fall down on sentence building because that's the one where you give them one word, or, write a sentence that has the word or in it. And those, especially the kids that have weak language skills, and it's not just phonological, okay, but you can see she had good language skills up here, and it's coming through on the writing, okay? And then the essay composition, she got a 96, okay? And then there's these sub-scores that go you can see everything average, 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 right? So it really seems like her language, she had a good strong score in her verbal reasoning stuff, all the language testing, the writing, that aspect. It seems like it's really that phonological decoding stuff that's interfering. Okay, and then I'll talk briefly about these composite scores here. I think that's it. So there you go. That's how I explain to the families. I don't know how long was that, about 30 minutes? I don't know how long that was, okay? All right, so now, did anybody have a question about that, or anything on that? That's how I think that's a minimum explanation then we talk about the eligibility, you know, in the next part, you know, where, you know, blah, blah, blah. You know, this student, I end up qualifying her in basic reading, not in reading comprehension. Okay, and I can't remember if there was remember what I was saying I didn't like about the Wyatt, how they combine comprehension and fluency into one composite score? I don't think that should be. I think it should be two separate scores, okay? It's two separate skills, okay? Like this student, right? Remember, she was average on her comprehension, but she was real low on her fluency. Okay, and so I don't like that on that one. Okay, all right, so I'm going to go on to the next part then. All right, so here's, I thought, you know, when I started for this, if I can make it work, I just got the first class and I rejiggered it. Okay, the first one, from the first night, when you first met me, you're like, who on earth is this crazy guy that's standing up here? What on earth is he talking about? All right, so then I want to go back through it, because I think I remember I had this slide in here, but I changed the title on it. Remember we saw Keith Rayner and Matthew Schnaps and those guys with their eye movement things, right? There were some little videos and we saw some slides. You know, I found this picture a long time ago, before Matthew Schnaps had even published that stuff. And so I put on here, you can't unring the bell, meaning you can't take that knowledge out of your head now. I've put it in there and it's tattooed on your brain, I hope. So on this one from the original class, I put why I'm here, but I changed it to why we're here, because now you guys have the pieces, okay? Right? Less than 60% of students in New Mexico are proficient in reading, okay? And that dramatically affects their adult life outcomes. It dramatically affects it.
Can I ask a question that I've wanted to ask all semester, but I'm finally getting the nerve to ask you?
Sure.
Okay, so the 60% proficient in a reading score, that's based on like the SBA?
SBA, right?
And how valid is that? A
Well,
measurement of-
I understand, yeah, but even if you look at NAEP and there's other measures also, they're really low also. And so, it's not a perfect test, but it's all we got, but I believe that it's not that far off the mark, right? I don't,
Except for its readability.
Well, their readability, exactly, Alicia's research, right, and I agree that they're probably all like that. I don't, I haven't, most things that, the problem is that when they give the third grade test, the passages are actually fourth grade or fifth or sixth, and depending on the subject and stuff,
Well,
and
the
so,
scores, the range of scores is so wide.
right,
You can be proficient from here to here.
Right.
I
well,
mean, so,
it's the only measure we have, I guess, the only universal measure we have, and I don't, and I haven't seen, for SBA, I have not seen a correlational study like between it and Woodcock-Johnson but they do those studies. What I have seen and that I can remember seeing is, the correlation between Dibbles and those other, and the Dibbles, I've seen a triangle here. So I've seen Dibbles correlated with SBA, or not SBA because they haven't done it in New Mexico, but I saw it with the Colorado test and with the Arizona test, and the correlations are high. They go for anywhere from 0.7 to 0.85, okay? So that, the Dibbles correlates at a very high level, a 0.7 to 0.85 is considered a very high correlation. Dibbles correlates with those real strongly, okay? And I've seen correlations then between, SBA and Dibbles also. So you see how that works? I've seen SBA correlated with Dibbles and it has similar numbers like that, okay? I've seen, and then I've seen Dibbles with Woodcock-Johnson, okay? And the Dibbles correlates with Woodcock-Johnson at 0.89, okay? And with the Stanford-Binet, it correlates at 0.91. That's perfect. I mean, that's, in my opinion, that there is no higher correlation. When they take students and they give them the same test, you give them the Woodcock-Johnson, and then wait 6 months and give them the Woodcock-Johnson again, guess what level? It's the same test with the same student. Guess what the correlation is? 0.89. It's not 1. It's not right. That's as good as it gets. If you give the same student the same test, you get 0.89, which that to me says that's as high as correlation goes in the real world. And so, you see what I'm saying? I haven't seen a direct correlation like that, but I've seen sort of that triangle. I've seen Dibbles correlated with the SBA, and I've seen Dibbles correlated with our tests. And I know our tests are valid and reliable. I believe that they are, okay? And I know the psychometrics behind those is sound. And so, given that triangle, I believe that they're actually pretty good. And there's all those other factors, motivation and, and there's all that stuff that's not measured, but, and then there's all those weaknesses. I agree, Alicia, none of it's perfect, but does that answer that?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I have a question about the 60% too. How does that compare with other places in the world?
It's real similar. I mean, we're a little bit lower, but most states, when you look at them, they have they're a little higher, but I'd say that's more common than not. Okay, I'm sure it is.
You were asking about other countries?
Yeah.
Oh,
like
other countries. Oh, well.
You were saying maybe
Oh, no, I think we're down in the
tests
bottom
are
third, yeah.
Not done in other countries.
Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, well, and if you depend, Singapore and Finland and these super countries, they just blow us away like crazy. As far as other wealthy, industrialized, first world countries, I think we're pretty low in that group, yeah. Let me keep, so yeah, I'm sorry, that's my hearing is, I believe, like I've said before, we can do a lot better. A properly run school with a properly trained staff should be hitting close to 90%, no matter what. You can be the worst ghetto school with the worst poverty, the worst ESL, the worst every problem imaginable. You still ought to be hitting close to 90%, okay? Because I can give you all the examples of schools like that are doing that. I worked in one, okay? And so there's no unsurmountable barrier there. Okay, so I had these objectives that I put up at the first, okay? So I'd like to just go through them, okay, and see how you guys, so one was learn to administer those tests, and so I think you guys got that, right? That was, okay. we learned about CHC theory, okay?
I'm sorry, I want to just jump in there. I wanted to give feedback. You guys did phenomenal on the whisk floor. You guys really put the effort into it. I mean, you lost a point here and there, but I mean, in general, that was the best I've gotten back with tests. So if you can ride out with that, and the whisk is like the big test.
It's the most common one, yeah.
So I just want to give you a lot of kudos on that, and also the C-top. Remember, we did, because of the way the snow day happened, it was all a mess, and you pretty much taught yourselves that one. I mean, I talked about it, demonstrated a little bit in class. I think it was almost all perfect scores on that. I mean, it is a simpler test, but I mean, I think you need to give yourselves credit that you're getting the hang of this testing stuff.
Yeah.
In my opinion, so.
Yeah. Good, excellent. Learning disability diagnosis, that was, the very end, that's those chapters from Flanagan and stuff, and about her 4 or 5 step procedure for that. Don't do severe discrepancy, in my opinion, go do away with severe discrepancy, stick with dual discrepancy, the pattern of strengths and weaknesses. I don't know when it was, sometime in the last few days, I sent you guys a bunch of, a barrage of I finally figured out how to make a listserv, so I can, instead of having to type in all the, it only took the whole semester. So I sent out, there's another, and we're not gonna have time tonight, I wanted to show it tonight. It's like a 9-minute video from Dawn Flanagan, and it's on, and I'll send you guys the link, okay? It's about that software that we talked about last class, where she actually shows you and she clicks through it in the video, and when you see it, you'll buy that book, I think, for the pattern of strengths and weaknesses.
I was gonna bring it tonight. I was looking, sitting at my table, looking at the books on my shelf at work, and I saw the first book of Flanagan and McGrew that started that whole cross battery thing. It was called some intelligence desk reference, like the physician's desk reference. That was their idea. And it was all based on just the GF and the GC because they hadn't gotten any further yet at that time. So that was my first introduction. I have the first one. I think I have every edition all the way through now.
Yeah, and hopefully you guys will do the same thing. So we talked about that. We didn't get to spend as much, but I hope that's what differential 2 will go further with on that one. Dyslexia, we talked a lot about dyslexia, right, about that stuff. The math, we had one class, basically on that, and really, in my opinion, that math stuff is real. There's still a lot of it's out beyond the campfire light, right, where they haven't really figured it out. I think that working memory stuff, right, the interparietal sulcus, that stuff, and the mental ruler, that stuff, I think they're starting to get there, but I think they really haven't worked that out. And there's not a lot more that I would have brought in anyway on that. So that, there's still, writing we didn't get to, okay? We didn't talk about writing disabilities at all in here, so that one we didn't get to.
So just a little teaser, we are gonna talk more about those 2 areas in differential diagnosis too.
Good.
The people that are coming for that one.
Phonology, we talked a ton about that, right? We talked a lot about that. Working memory, we've talked a lot about that. Executive skills, we didn't talk a lot about that. We had our readings, but I think that's pretty straightforward. I don't think that's I don't think, I think that you guys have a good start with that. How SLD is defined in the IDEA and the New Mexico team, we didn't really compare those two. But the thing about the basic psychological processes, right, we talked about that a few times, that a weakness in these basic psychological processes interfering with the learning. How to write an adequate psychoeducational evaluation report. That's the tricky one, okay? For me, what happened is there was too much content that I felt like I had to give you the content more at this point. This was my only chance, and my fear was if I didn't give you this content, then nobody was going to give it to you, and so.
I think that one reading that starts out with, what was it, how not to write a bad report?
Yeah.
That one, hang on to that one. When you start writing reports, go back and look at that, because that, I was like, oh, this is
And that is no, as far as I know, that is no longer available on the internet. I found that from one of the International Dyslexia Association. If you go to International Dyslexia Association, they have an annual conference, and then sometime after the conference is over, the presenters will put their PowerPoints up on the site, and there's hundreds of them. You can download them. And I found that on there, and I had the same thing. I'm like, wow, this one's really good. And I saved it, but then I've gone back subsequently to find it, and it's no longer there. And I agree, that one is really helpful. My favorite thing is at the beginning of that. I don't know if because we didn't talk about that reading in class. Was the guy said writing reports is easy. Just stare at a blank piece of paper until drops of blood appear on your forehead. and so, but it goes on. It's really good. It has a lot of great tips in there. Okay. All right, so then I said, for me, my personal was to change the diagnostician paradigm into a more fully informed paradigm, like all the stuff, executive skills and working memory and attention and phonology, all the stuff that we've talked about there, you're more informed, but then also sort of a more compassionate one where it really matters to you, where it's not a drive-by and you're not like, oh, I gotta go, sorry if Johnny can't read, good luck, bye, right? That's my two goals, to get you so you're fully informed, and then that your heart is turned on also, where you realize that this is really important for this student. Okay. So then I had my diagnostician myths. Remember that I came up with the uniform for the mythical creature. If I just make a legally compliant evaluation report and it's done on time, I'm doing a good job. I completely disagree with that. That's the problem. That's not a good job. That's the problem in our field. It's compliance based, and it's not about compliance. It's about actually helping somebody. You still need to be compliant with all the regulations, right? But the goal is to help somebody. Okay. And so I put this, myth number 2, there's not much that can be done. 13% of students with learning disabilities are proficient in reading. That's a typical number if you look at the schools. If you go to the PED website, I've got the spreadsheet, I can send it to you guys, and they have it broken down, each school by each grade level, students with disabilities, how many of them, what percent are proficient in reading. Okay, it's usually somewhere around that, okay? Which means 87% of them are not proficient in reading. No, that's wrong. It should only be about, at the most, 30%. It should be the other way. It should be about 70% of the students with disabilities are proficient in reading, okay? In a well-run school, and you're going to help with that. Your report, I have teachers that come to me literally, and when they get those outside evals, they go, how am I supposed to write the goals with this? Right? Because they've gotten accustomed to where it's itemized in there, and the information they need is right there, and they know where to find it, okay? Evaluation reports are it's really just about that last page. Did they qualify or not? And how many times I've seen that, the teachers, they just flip to the last page. Did they qualify or not? Okay, that's not really the issue. The issue is all that other stuff. Okay, that's why you did this elaborate evaluation. Okay, so I had this levels of knowledge. Okay, remember I was saying that I'm hoping that we can, so level 1, this to me is what the typical program, this is how I was trained. So I'm technically proficient with administering the standardized test, got it. Okay, I can use the NM team manual, right, if it has the right guidelines in there. Okay, I can write a legally compliant report. It's got those, those 9 sections in there that I must have. Okay, and I can make a legally compliant eligibility determination. All right, yes, I followed the guidelines in there. Okay, you could stop right there. You're good to go. Okay, you're going to get a great evaluation. But did you or didn't you help somebody? All right, and in my opinion, level 1 is often more harmful because it leaves so many blanks with the families and the students, and what fills in that blank. If there's a vacuum anywhere in that process, what goes into that vacuum is the reason I'm behind is because I'm not smart. It's because I'm not smart enough to learn, and we have to fill that vacuum so that can't go in there, because that definitely happens. Okay, so level 2. We understand how processing deficits are really what underlies learning disability. It's not about how smart you are. You have these processing deficits that are interfering. Okay, you've got to be able to explain to educators how that affects learning, like I just did. Okay, to the families and the educators. Okay, you have to be able to write an evaluation report that explains it. I put up also in Dropbox. I put the report that went with Jane Doe. That thing I just at the beginning of class I just talked about. If you look in tonight's class, the report is in there. And it's a year old, and mine have evolved a little bit. Every year there's some creep in my reports, you know. If you looked at my report from 10 years ago versus now, they're dramatically different. And every year there's a little bit of creep as my understanding evolves, and right, and I get more language that I feel is helpful to the families. So you guys have that stuff, right? It's in there. Get it, use it. That's what I'm not saying, you know, that's, take it apart, use it any way you want, okay? I'm hoping that I've given you this platform. You're standing up here already where you can come right in and have banks of language ready to go that the families can understand and that are helpful, okay? Your ability to make appropriate recommendations, right? Using context clues is never an appropriate recommendation. Right? It's not, because what you want is to build, if you don't build automatically recognized sight words, you're always stuck in the mud. And using context clues does not build sight words. It is the opposite. It's overemphasizing that pathway. That pathway is already working great. We need that other side, the phonology and the orthography to work. Okay? So that's level 2. Okay, level 3, understanding the cognitive. This is Kevin McGrew's word, like those non-cognitive factors, the affective stuff, the motivation and the persistence. And remember, that was that last question on the exam. Okay, like Flanagan said, what are these other factors that are not SLD that are facilitators and inhibitors? Okay, understand the significance of the evaluation for the student. Okay, the student, this is a really important moment for this kid. Those kids come in there, they know something's going on, right? They're smart kids. They know, and this is, if you just kind of blow it off, then that vacuum is there, and guess what goes into the vacuum? I'm here because I'm not smart, okay? And you have to fill that in otherwise, all right? Understanding the psycho-emotional significance of an incomplete but legally compliant evaluation and report, okay? There's the vacuum right there. It's legally compliant, but boy, if you don't make them understand the difference, then it's going to get filled in with the reason I'm behind is because I'm not smart. Okay, and then that globalizes, and if I'm not smart, I can't do anything, right? It globalizes across their whole life. Okay, so there's level 2 and 3. That's my goal, is that I'm pushed you up, and I'm right. Level 4, a full understanding of individual students, how their development and learning is a result of highly complex interaction of multiple, right? And I think we've talked about that a lot, how it's these multiple factors. Dyslexia exists along multiple dimensions, how I always say that, right? So it's very complex. We can't just take one thing out at a time. It's this interwoven mesh of skills, okay? Highly complex interaction of multiple genetic, and we talked about that, environmental, cognitive, linguistic, perceptual, sensory, emotional, and motivational factors. All those things are going together to make the student, their learning, okay? And that's, I think you need to understand that, the report needs to reflect that, the families need to understand that. All this stuff is interconnected, right? You've got to address all these factors, so you can't pull any one of them out, all right? And that's what I see on the drive-by reports and the drive-by interpretation. They're not tying it together for the people. All right, so remember I had this, turning the Titanic, okay? How do we achieve all 4 levels? And this was how I thought about it today, and I thought, well, you do it one evaluation at a time, okay? Do a good report, do a good evaluation, do a good report, and do a good explanation. If you can't write a long report, then give a real thorough explanation at the meeting, okay? I believe that you've got the pieces to do that already, okay? All right, I want to go back to pattern language. This is, were you here the first night when we talked about pattern language? All right, so Margot happens to know, I love Christopher Alexander. Remember we saw Christopher Alexander in that video. And so I wanted, because I feel like, when I put up pattern, it was kind of like when I talked about Marilyn Adams that night about the vocabulary learning and how the computer model learned 3 times as much about words that weren't in the text as the words that were. And you guys were all looking at me like, this guy's full of it, right? And so I kind of think, the same thing with the pattern language. You're like, why on earth is he talking about architecture? Okay, so I want to try and bring it all the circle all the way around. So I put in these, when I put in the red, this is my little changes. These are sentences from Christopher Alexander. So I changed it here. I said, evaluations and reports have the capacity to play a more significant role in human life and will actually make life better as a result of its injection into the system. That's what I want. I want your report, it does have that capacity, tremendously so, okay? To make that student's life better. If nothing else, just that they believe in themselves. Even if you haven't given them the golden ticket and all of a sudden learning got easier, if they understand it's not about how smart I am, it's about how I hear the sounds and words or my attentional control or whatever, okay? And here's my example, Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. I believe the world is a better place from him making that, okay, or designing that. And it's the same thing. I feel like when you do a great job with your evaluation report and interpretation, the world is a better place for that kid and for that family, okay? So this is Christopher Alexander. The sad assumption that he said we, and I put they. By they, I mean the drive-by evaluators, okay? The sad assumption that they are doing, or what they are doing, has virtually no ability to produce a nourishing life and to sustain us, okay? I agree. Those 6-page reports, they have no ability to create a nourishing life and to help. I believe they're harmful, in fact, okay? Because they have that void. There's a vacuum in there that all the unanswered blanks get filled in with harmful messages. And so I found this example of versus, there's Falling Water, or there's my neighborhood here. Only my neighborhood is much worse than that here in Albuquerque. Okay, so Christopher Alexander again, he says, I was not happy with what I saw. Something more fundamental was missing. That's why I'm here. That's why I came over here and agreed to do this, right? And then Sir Walter Scott, okay, it's not fish you're buying, it's men's lives. And that's exactly what I feel like. It's not, you're not doing an evaluation. This is somebody's life is in your hands. And I really, really, really feel that way. It's really important. It's not just whatever and I'll just, I'm in a hurry, okay? This is, it's sending a very strong message to this person. And what we don't want is for that to be the wrong message, that I'm not smart and that's why I can't learn and that's why I'm behind, okay? So in pattern language, what pattern? It's a pattern, right? And it's all these patterns, these recurrent patterns in architecture. And what Christopher Alexander says is, there's these archetypal patterns, okay? And if you think about Nancy Mather and her building blocks, that's really what those are. They're the archetypal patterns. These are the building blocks that we must have for learning, okay? So he says this on a pattern language. A pattern language offers a practical language for building and planning. The reader is given an overview of 250 patterns that are the units of this language. What the units of our language are: executive skills, CHC factors, working memory, phonology, right? Those are the building blocks. Those are the units of our language, okay? Each consisting of a design, and I said learning problem, a discussion and an illustration and a solution, okay? By understanding recurrent, and then again, that's my part, the red, by understanding recurring learning problems in our environment, evaluators, I don't know what, he had some other word, designers, evaluators can identify extant patterns in their own reports and evaluations and use these patterns to create a language of their own. That was my goal for you guys. You've got the language now. All what I just said, all that stuff, the working memory and the executive skills and the CHC factors and all that stuff, you've got the language. What your job now is to put it together, okay? And that Nancy Mather framework is a good framework around which to understand it. So here it is. I just threw that in to remind you, okay? This is the recurrent patterns that you're going to see over and over and over again with these kids, right? That they've got strengths and weaknesses across. And each kid will have like we just saw that last one where she was strong there on the spelling and the orthography, okay? You'll see these different patterns, but these patterns will begin to emerge after a while for you. And hopefully it won't take so long with this framework already in mind for you, okay? So this said, my thing is here, understanding and wholeness and vision and hope. That's my paradigm. That's what I want. Not the drive-by, I got to get it done, and it doesn't matter. That's really what I think that I get from the diagnosticians. They're like, oh, why do you do that? Nobody reads that report. It doesn't matter. It really matters. So this is what somebody said about Christopher Alexander. To read Christopher Alexander is regularly to feel a sense of vision and hope. In all his books and designs, the aim is the search for understanding, beauty, and wholeness. I like that. That's right. If you go into diagnostician world with that in the back of your mind instead of instead of drive-by and, oh man, I wish I could go to lunch now, okay? So there talks about the connection, but how all these patterns, and how we've talked about that over and over again. You can't just pull any one thing out. They're all interconnected, okay? No pattern is an isolated entity, and so I put in here no cognitive ability, right? They're all, processing speed is connected to working memory, connected to fluid reasoning. You can't take one without them being connected to the others, okay? Each ability can exist in the world only to the extent that it's supported by the other abilities. I very much agree with that, and I'm hoping that you guys got that sense of this, is that you can't pull one out, that they're all connected and each affects the other. The larger patterns, so each ability is connected to the larger pattern in which it's part of, okay, and then it's connected to smaller patterns, okay. So here's, from this one, Christopher Alexander talks about when you do your job right, in the end, there's a more coherent whole. Okay, and I put this up here. I love this little thing. One person can only do so much, and if you, I was trying to find I couldn't find it. I'm such a bad word processor. The scratch through on the PowerPoint, and I don't even know where it was because I wanted to do that on his other things. But when you build a thing, you can't merely build that thing in isolation, right? These kids, it's not. There's a whole person there. It's not just about their reading, okay? But must also repair the world around it. That's what that report does, in my opinion. That's what your evaluation does. It's not. It's talking about the world around that kid also, so that the larger world becomes more coherent and more whole. That is my goal for you guys. Okay. So he talks about here. That's my example. This is all from the first night. One of his patterns is called the accessible green. And if you think about here around, like behind Zimmerman Library and around UNM, how they have those beautiful green spaces, right? And that's one of his archetypes, right? The accessible green. And you think about that when you go out there, you're like, how you feel when you go to those places, okay? So his accessible green pattern is it's a part of these larger patterns. It's inside these other ones. A subculture boundary, identifiable neighborhood. You think about the student ghetto, right? Where Ricky lives. And Margot, right? So quiet backs. So he has these patterns. So accessible green is these ones are built with this inside them. But also, what's inside an accessible green is a positive outdoor space, tree places, a garden wall. You think about all around the campus. It's a good example. Okay, this is the one I was hoping that you didn't get to see, Margot. This was here's Margot. Okay, so this is one of his patterns in a pattern language. Oh, and you know what? I brought it, and so I'm just gonna. I know you guys are you're like, get that book out of here. I'm just gonna pass it around. If you guys want to look at pattern language, it's my favorite book. So this is one of his 250 patterns. It's called The University as a Marketplace, and I thought this was really about this class. It really spoke to this class. Concentrated, cloistered universities with closed administration policies and rigid procedures which dictate who may teach a course kill opportunities for learning. Who am I? I'm just some guy, right? I don't have a PhD, right? But I think that Margot recognized that there was a way to make this program a rich program, and not, right? And so, to me, that really spoke to this class, and then the changes that Margot has made. I don't know, whenever it was, 6 months ago or something, or a year ago, I went out on a limb, and I sent out to Ricky and Margot and the other people and Catherine. I sent out a thing from pattern language, and I thought they're going to think I'm so nuts, right? And I couldn't believe it. I got a response from Margot saying, man, I studied out there in Berkeley with Christopher Alexander, and I love pattern language. In fact, that's how I designed this program, and I couldn't believe it. And so then established the university as a marketplace of higher education. This means the university is open to people of all ages on a full-time, part-time, or course-by-course basis. That's exactly how Margot has changed this. It seems to me, right? Like that's why I didn't get my master's here, because it was the opposite. They had it so restricted and so limited and so difficult that I moved to Texas. I want to say that I moved to Texas. So then here's these other patterns, okay? And again, the book is about architecture. It's kind of like this class is about learning disabilities, but it's also, for me, it's about all this other stuff. It's about sort of the human side of it, okay? So I like the dancing in the street, old people everywhere. There's so many very interesting, right? You're like, but this book's about architecture, right? Well, it is, and architecture that's done right, and community planning that's done right, and college courses that are done right are about more than that, okay? And then the beer hall, and I gotta see if I can, I'm gonna see if I can.
Chris likes that one.
4:45. Can I, Sean, I just wanna, just for Margot's sake, since she happens to be sitting here, okay? Cause I don't know how to expand that on here, but I wanna read what it says on here on page 445 for Margot's sake, for the beer hall, because this is one of my favorite ones. And I know this class is not about beer. Not yet, not till after I shut up, right? All right, so, let me say, it says, somewhere in the community, at least one place, one big place where a few hundred people, oh no, wait, sorry, that wasn't it. I gotta find it. No. I don't think I'm going to be able to find it quickly enough. I'm sorry. There's a great quote in here about that. Okay, so the pattern language for, so how does that, your pattern language is kind of like what I talked about, all those things that we've, our pattern language incorporates all those 4 levels, right? It's not just the technically proficient one that's done compliant, okay? You got to throw in those other levels, okay? When utilized, results in evaluations and reports, are coherent and whole. Okay, you use the pattern language. Okay, all participants are to understand the problem. Okay, everybody, the family, the parents, the student, the teachers. Okay, generally that's not how it goes. And then the pattern language shows a clear path forward. I think that's the thing too, is about where I was saying you got to be able to make appropriate recommendations for, and by appropriate, I mean what works, okay? What's actually going to get the student there, okay? And it's not just your opinion, but you back that up somehow, okay? So I like this. He talks about there's a difference between the poetry, the language. He says this language can be a medium for prose or a medium for poetry. The difference between poetry and prose is not that different languages are used, but the same language is used differently. I use the same language as every other diagnostician in my reports, but I use it differently. And in the end, the 2 reports are night and day, okay? It's all the same parts, they're doing the same test, but somehow at the end, the end products come out vastly different. And to me, that's the poetry and the prose, the difference, what I'm hoping for you guys. So here's what he says about, Christopher Alexander says about prose. Each word has one meaning, and the sentence too has one simple meaning. Johnny got an 87, and that's below average. Right? What's that mean? I don't know. It means he's below average, but it doesn't explain anything. Okay? That's the difference I'm talking about. That's generally that report. I just sent Ricky a template from Joel Schneider for reports, and he's one of the authors of one of our chapters that we had early on with McGrew, the CHC chapter. His template. This is what he says. He says you should have a 1-paragraph summary. 1 paragraph? I did 4 hours of testing, and I'm going to summarize it in 1 paragraph? What? How could you do that? That doesn't mean anything to anybody. And so I deleted that before I sent it to Ricky. That's why I said it was modified. Joel Snyder's modified. I know I'm guilty of doing that with all these people's things, and so I changed that part. And so, but that would be if it's 1 paragraph, it's going to be pretty simple, and it's going to have one thing going on. Okay. So then the poetry side. Okay. This is my hope for your reports. Okay. In a poem, I put in a report, the meaning is far more dense. Each subtest carries several meanings. And I think you see that now, that they do. Is it about attention? Is it about phonology? Is it about working memory? And there's all these different things that are affecting that, okay? Each subtest carries several meanings, and the sentence, or the report, okay, as a whole carries an enormous density of interlocking meanings, which together illuminate the whole child, okay? That's what I see with that's why we do these tests, right? You've got all these different tests. There's an interlocking grid of different meanings that are revealed from the whole evaluation, not just your testing, but from the whole referral packet and all that information, okay? that somehow you've got to bring that together into your report. And I'm hoping that the example that, you know, the I gave, you know, before I sent you guys that summary and recommendations part, there's a tonight on the Dropbox, there's that a whole report in there also. That's my effort. I'm far, I'm sure, but you know, my last day as a diagnostician, I'm going to sit down and say, I never made it. I never got that report done, okay? It's challenging, but I'm getting better and better and better, okay? The compression, he means like putting lots of density of meaning in there, not just one meaning. Each sentence has a lot of density of meaning. The compression illuminates each of the patterns, okay, so all those different things, okay, working memory, executive skills, CHC skills, and sheds light on its meaning. Also, it illuminates our lives as we understand a little more about the connections of our inner needs. That is exactly what a good report is, in my opinion, okay? It's possible to make buildings, and I put reports, by stringing together patterns in a rather loose way. A report made like this is an assembly of patterns. It is not dense, it's not profound. Okay, remember, he said that in the video we watched the first night, he had this moral preoccupation with making it profound, okay? But it's also possible to put patterns together in such a way that many patterns overlap in the same space. That's your report, okay? The report is very dense. It has many meanings captured in a small space, and through this density, it becomes profound. That's, you know, my problem is my reports, I put a lot of meaning into my reports, and guess what? They're 40 pages long, okay? Nobody has time to read, they don't want to read a 40-page report, and so what you've got to find a way to compress the meanings into a smaller space. But by smaller, I don't mean one paragraph, like Joel Schneider, and most, you know, most reports you'll see the summary is pretty much one paragraph long, okay? I don't believe that'll do it, though. Okay, it doesn't help anybody. Okay, I want to try to watch, you've seen, Chris, I know, has seen this one. I don't know if this will link or not, let's just try it. It's only 5 minutes, okay? It has music also. All right, if I can.
Well, it's more music by Beethoven next, and pretty much the best-known piece of music ever written. It's his Fifth Symphony, a work that shook Vienna when it was first heard there in 1808. It's continued to send out tremors to the wider world ever since. It's not an exaggeration, I think, to say this piece changed the state of music in an instant. Everything about this symphony was charged with a kind of explosive energy that had never been imagined, let alone heard before. It all starts with 4 now famous opening notes, and everything that follows is just as severe and lean, even the orchestra, stripped back to its barest essentials. The ideas are terse, the music keeps stopping and starting. Beethoven is urging us to sit up and take notice. Well, I talked to conductor Donald Brunnacles earlier about this symphony that shook the world.
The first movement
there's your
is
report.
unrelenting in its energy. It most certainly has darkness to it. It most certainly is, once again, we come back to this word, the struggle, whatever that means to us all individually. And there are moments of light. It's like these glimpses through these storm clouds the sun breaks through, and you have these glimpses of perhaps the end of whatever journey you imagine yourself on. But the first movement ends as dramatically and as darkly as it begins. All together now. Thank you, Maestro. The second movement is more, it's idyllic, serene, beautiful, in some ways triumphant. Once again, it's a glimpse of what will happen in the finale. It's sort of an idealized world, if you like. Bring on. We go to the third movement, which is the traditional scherzo, but we're back very much to this slightly more mysterious, how can I say, spectres of the first movement appear. And of course, this predominant motive that we heard from the very outset, those four notes permeate almost every bar of this piece. The third movement then becomes dark, mysterious, and then out of this darkness emerges this phenomenal triumphant finale. And even in that finale, we're not quite finished. He draws us back into the world of the first movement. But as I said earlier, it very much, it ends in a breathlessly exciting way. Wonderfully optimistic, and yeah, it's like any great music or any great symphony. I hope we as performers take the audience on the journey that we find ourselves on, because there's a narrative, and each and every one amongst us, I think, brings their personal narrative to us.
And it is, as you say, it's essentially a message of hope, that out of the darkest despair, you can get to a wonderful place by the end.
Yes, and we may not experience this glorious end. I mean, I'm not suggesting that darkness always ends in light. There are many questions that we all grapple with in life. And there are many questions that will perhaps never be answered, and who knows how this will all end, or how we all end, or what's in the future. And in this case, with this remarkable Fifth Symphony, it's worth the struggle. Terrific work. Thank you all very much indeed. Have a good concert tonight. Bravo.
Donald Brunicles, tonight's conductor. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, then, a journey that takes us from despair to ecstasy, from darkness to light, struggle to release. One of the most important pieces in the whole development of music history, a symphony whose opening has sometimes been compared to fate knocking at the door. This is music that drives us forward, right from its opening bars.
All right, so that's, what's that? What's that?
Why can't we watch that?
Yeah, it's super good. That's what because I've already seen it about 1,000 times. So. Again, to me, they weren't talking about symphonies, right? That's your report. There's somebody's personal narrative in there. Okay, we've all got a personal narrative, but the student that you're evaluating, their narrative has not been written yet. That's really, and their emerging personality is coming forward. What you say in your report is going to have a lot to do with what emerges. Okay, and if you say nothing in your report, then that void is going to be filled with "I'm not smart," and that's going to become their personal narrative. Okay, and so I really feel like that. It's not for that family and for that individual. This is a monumental thing. Okay, not always, but a lot of the time it is. Okay, so here was my job description for a diagnostician. It's a conveyor belt delivering the struggle, as he said, right? The struggle. That's each of those kids, right? Every one of those kids. Do you think it's not a struggle? It's a huge struggle for those kids. And who am I? And how am I going to succeed? Okay. And then, I had this, I think I had this from the first class, this quote from Winston Churchill: "Men occasionally stumble over the truth, but most of them pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing had happened." Okay? I hope that in this class, that I know that sounds dramatic, that you stumbled over the truth, and that you're not just going to get up and brush yourself off and act like nothing had happened. Okay, so this thing, this is all from him. The emerging personal narrative. What you're doing is you're writing that student's personal narrative. Okay, not the whole story, but a really critical part of it. And it's not always, but it often is. Okay, so we find ourselves on this journey. These kids, right? A personal narrative is in each of us. Okay, your report becomes a central part of their narrative. Okay, any blank spots in your report or interpretation. Okay, you can write a great report, but if you go in and do a drive-by interpretation, I think you've made just as grievous of an error, right? Okay, any blank spots in your report or interpretation will automatically be filled with the incorrect message, right? Which is, I can't read because I'm not smart enough to read. That's always waiting to run out of the bushes, out into the firelight, okay? There was, a long time ago, I don't know when it was, 2009 or something, I did this thing, I was talking to Peter about it with National Institute for Literacy, this online learning disabilities discussion group, okay? And there was a lady there who, they asked me to come on and do like a little presentation, be the guest expert, and she was the lady that was right before me. And so I emailed with her this lady, Dr. Mary Kelly, and she runs this learning disability clinic in New York City at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. This is what she said: most adults who come to our clinic think the reason, this is straight from her email, think the reason they have struggled so terribly with reading is that they are mentally retarded or crazy. Okay? I didn't ask her to say that. That's not right. That's coming from somebody who's been in it for a long time, who runs a learning disability clinic in New York City. That's what you're trying to stop. They're not mentally retarded. They're not crazy. But look what she says. Most of them that come in, that's what they think. Okay? That's what your report is. That's what you're preventing right there. Okay? I hope. And by having a good evaluation and a good report, and hopefully good recommendations that lead to a resolution of the problem. Okay? Why do we need to do a better job? Okay, this is a quote from Marilyn Adams from Beginning to Read. If they do not catch on to the concept and nature of phonemes, they will fail at reading, and that's too great a tragedy to gamble with. And I agree. It's so consequential. Okay, and almost every kid you deal with is going to have a reading problem. Okay, so I put this in, and I think we're actually going to finish early tonight. I can't believe it. So the traditional 6-page report, that's pretty much how almost all the reports are. They're around that, 6 or 10 pages, okay? This is from Christopher Alexander when he's talking about bad planning and bad community development and bad architecture. He said it distorts reality and perpetuates and solidifies distortions. That's what bad reports do, okay? They solidify the distortion, and the distortion is, I can't read because I'm not smart enough to read. And so you don't want that to happen. Leaving information out of a report does not solve any problems, it creates new problems. I really believe that. A short report, it created an additional new problem. It didn't even deal with the first problem, the original one. Now we have that problem plus this new one, okay? That is, I hate myself, and because this report didn't explain anything, I'm sure I'm mentally retarded or crazy, okay? So, this is, from the video we just saw. Here's what I want your reports to be: darkness to light, struggle to relief, confusion to understanding, the message of hope, okay? All that. And it can be. You don't have to get up there and have tears coming down and be a preacher, okay? Just explain it in a clear way that they understand what their actual problem is, okay? And what the students' strengths are, okay? This was from IDEA. They said, why a quality report is important. It has this whole diagnostic part, okay, right? It identifies the likely source of the problem, okay? It rules out other causes of reading difficulties. It determines the profile of strengths and weaknesses. I think that you guys are equipped for that, okay? It's their second reason. Intervention planning, through this, now that we know where the strengths and weaknesses are, we can do better quality intervention planning. And then documentation also, right? If you need accommodations on standardized tests later, I don't know what, if ACT or any of those, or GRE, or, whatever the exam is, the civil service exam, I think a lot of those do have accommodations for dyslexia, okay, and for learning disabilities. But they need it to be documented at an earlier age, okay? It's not just about eligibility. I think most diagnosticians would say, oh, the report, it's just an eligibility document. No, it's not. It's the story of this kid's life. It's you're opening the path that's going forward, okay? All right, that's it. Can you believe it? I actually got done early.